Interested in all things psychology? You are at the right place. Here, we bring exciting and thought-provoking ideas. We travel into our minds and some things out of this world. Welcome to the Psychology Debrief.
Hello and welcome to the Psychology Debrief. I'm your host, Sam Fairlamb, and today we're talking about doing a PhD, what it's like, how do you get onto one, and why should you necessarily do it. I'm joined today by Professor, first of all, Dawn Watling, and also Dr. Jenny Murphy, as well as Dr. Beatrice Hayes, who actually is most recently just finished your PhD not too long ago. How long ago was that, Beatrice?
So I did my Viva in January and I had my corrections passed in February. That's right, isn't it, Dawn? Dawn was my supervisor. So this works quite nicely actually in this podcast.
Yeah, so we should point out that actually Dawn was Beatrice's PhD supervisor. So obviously they can talk a little bit more about what that sort of relationship is like and can see things from both sides of the perspective. But congratulations, first of all, to join the Doctor Club. It wasn't too much long ago that I also finished mine, although now starting to feel old when I think about that was sort of about 5 years ago now, I think. Anyway, I think that it was, best place to kind of start this conversation, by talking about necessarily what sort of, criterion people need to meet to get a PhD. I think that often there's a kind of fallacy, perhaps, that people assume you must be top of your class to go on to do a PhD. I certainly wasn't top of my class. I don't know about you guys. I know some of you are incredibly smart and talented, so maybe you were, but is it the case that students need to get a first in their undergraduate degree or master's distinction in their master's to go on to do a PhD, or is it not as straightforward as that?
I guess I can take this one. I don't think that it's necessary at all. A lot of our students, we have a mix. Some are coming in with 2-1s and some are coming in with first class degrees and distinctions. And I think if there's a balance in terms of showing and demonstrating that you're interested in research, understanding research questions, understanding the research process and what a PhD is about. And those are kind of key elements, and showing that enthusiasm, motivation are key, kind of those determination we like to see.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess almost in a way, the issue of what sort of degree type you're exited with is kind of confounded by the things that we care about when doing a PhD, right? So if you're interested in research, you're more likely to probably understand some of the psychology stuff and may have done quite well in your degree, but it's not necessarily, a first class or you can't get onto that degree program.
But like I was thinking as well, like I think having work experience can be really helpful as well. So even if, I did get a first, but even if you got a 2-1, you don't have to go straight from your degree into PhD straight away, or straight from degree to master's to PhD straight away. I certainly didn't do that. I worked as a teacher for a few years, and that kind of gave me some of the skills and the experience because I wanted to go into a developmental psychology PhD. So I think if there are people out there who like the idea of a PhD, think it's something that they would like to do, but perhaps they didn't get a first, or they got a 2-1, or perhaps they need a little bit more time kind of gathering those skills and that experience that they think will help them and support them in their PhD, you can do that as well. So I think that's just a good thing to note.
I agree. I think that research assistant experience is really valued. And I think when I was applying for PhDs, it was almost more valued that I'd done a summer research experience sort of internship rather than sort of the outcome of my degree overall.
It's important, though, to say that having research experience isn't necessary, because I know there's a lot of students in psychology programs that are really looking for that research experience and haven't had the opportunity as of yet, or have been unable to take the opportunity for other reasons. And I think that it's not necessary to have the research experience, but it is necessary to have that research awareness and thinking about how you go about the research process. And you can get that a lot from your final year project, or if you choose to do a master's afterwards in the master's dissertation. And that's what I did. I did large scale undergraduate project, and then I did my master's and moved on to PhD from there. So
yeah, and I think that's a good point. I think this broadly kind of speaks to the issue that I wanted to get onto next, which is this sense that we often think that we're not the type of people that should go on to do a PhD. You know, for example, I don't know if any of you felt the same when you started your PhD, but you looked around at your peers day one and you just thought, why am I here? I'm not like them. I'm not as talented or as, you know, would be able to do these things. I think some people refer to that kind of sense of imposter syndrome. I don't know, maybe if those are the kind of same experiences that you guys might have had during your time doing a PhD and applying.
I think it's a sort of normal sort of human trait to make comparisons with other people and to think sort of more poorly of yourself. PhDs, especially during a PhD, go in so many different trajectories. Some are quick and some are slower. Some have the ups and downs are different in terms of their timing. And I think at any one point, it's easy to look to another person and think things might be going better for them. Even though projects are so different. So I would say that certainly that's a feeling that you have at the very beginning, not to let it put you off applying for a PhD, because it is a sort of normal feeling to be having, and it's almost certainly likely that you will experience that sort of feeling again. So it's worth thinking and speaking to people around you, because the people around you are encouraging you to apply for a PhD. They're seeing something in you, for sure.
So I definitely found, just talking to other PhD students, it really settled my kind of imposter syndrome, because I was like, actually everyone feels exactly the same way. But yeah, like Jenny was saying, it's totally normal. It's just about knowing how to kind of manage it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about going to speak to other people and realizing necessarily that you're actually no real different from them. They're probably feeling the same way. You also said, you know, people talk about their areas of research and it sounds fantastic and you don't understand it. But I also think it was a related sort of issue that came to my mind. Right at the beginning of a PhD, it's not necessarily that you're going to really understand your own research very well either.
Exactly.
Certainly that wasn't my experience going in. I kind of had some ideas of what I will be doing, some knowledge, but it's not like necessarily you're expecting to be, you know, at that level where you have master level of knowledge on that area just yet. That's the process of 3 years, right? So again, just having some level of understanding about the topic that you're going into, you will learn over those 3 years and accumulate that knowledge to then be able to be more of a master of that sort of topic. So I think maybe that's also worth pointing out. Dawn, if I could just go to you, because obviously your position here is quite unique, because obviously those who are listening may not realize, but you actually sort of lead our kind of PhD program, and so have some level of input in selecting our applicants when we get, you know, when they come through. So before we actually get into what the actual application process is, I'm just wondering if you could maybe give a bit of an insight into, when you're sitting down looking at these applications, what necessarily are you then looking for? What would be the kind of key things that you are trying to think about when selecting those to go forward?
Okay, I guess some of the key things that we're looking for is really that there's a nice match. First of all, that the proposal seems feasible, that it's a good, clear research question. There's a nice, clear plan and recognition of how much time different elements might take within the particular PhD. And every PhD is different. So it's not like saying that you need to have 12 studies planned. Some PhDs, you only need 3 studies, for instance, or 2 studies, depending on the nature of the PhD. So it's thinking about the research area and what's expected within that area. We're looking for, you know, looking at CVs. We're looking to see if there's anything within the CV that stands out, that's interesting and gives us confidence that the student will be able to deliver on that plan. So whether that's if you've gotten awards, or if you've done particularly well in your research methods and statistics training, or if you have research experience, voluntary or paid, just kind of highlighting that within it. We're also looking to see that there's a good supervisor match. So at least at Roll Holloway, we like to know that there's the supervisor has sufficient experience to supervise the project. So we're looking just to see kind of where the supervisor's expertise is being showcased through the proposal and also through their supporting letters. So we take all of these factors into consideration, and thinking about, you know, we have so much, emphasis placed on the proposal, so much emphasis placed on the individual student and what they're coming with, and emphasis on the research kind of links with the supervisor, and how, in some cases, if it's a departmental studentship, how it links to things within the department more widely. So we are looking just to see a general fit, I think, is really important, and feasibility. And those are the types of things we're doing when we're shortlisting. And then when we're at interview, we're looking to see that the student understands the proposal, because we recognize that in some cases, some supervisors may provide a feedback and things like this on the proposal. We want to know that it's the student's work, the student's passionate about that work, the student's determined, they have a clear understanding of what they're going to be doing throughout the PhD.
So maybe it's just worth now going on to that kind of issue about, let's start from kind of the very first moment that you've decided that you want to do a PhD. What should you advise a student to do about going to find a PhD that they can then go and do?
I think this is something that we've talked about a lot with our undergraduates and our PGT students, the master's students, and thinking about, how do you kind of approach somebody? Where do you start? And some students are really, they get that nudge from a potential staff member. Other students haven't gotten that nudge. It does not mean that you can't do a PhD. It does not mean anything in that sense. I would still encourage, if you're interested in a PhD, the first point of call is to look to see who the staff members are. See what their research areas are. Determine an area in a field of study that you're interested in and that you feel like you're quite passionate about. The one thing about a PhD is that it's 3 years at least. Some students take up to 4 years, but it's 3 years that you're working on one topic. You really want to be passionate about that topic. You really want to have a motivation and something that inspires you that you want to address. So look towards and see what the supervisors are doing. And then approach them, send them an email. And I always recommend, when students send an email to a supervisor, it's really important. Include your CV, include your marks to date, so they can just assess and know before they start before they start conversations, what kind of your background experience is, what you'd be bringing, and where your interests have already been shown, so they can have that discussion and see if they're the right match. It's important to know that you can work with the supervisor. So sometimes it's thinking about, how do they respond to your email? How do you respond back? But also, how do they feedback on drafts and things like that? Because this, again, is somebody you're going to be working with for 3 years. And you want to know that you have a good relationship and you're able to communicate with them. Send the email, just say, I'm really interested in your topic area. I've done some research, I've read your paper, I've seen kind of this, and it leads me to start thinking about other work in this field, and maybe highlight a couple of the questions or things it's leading you towards. And see if you can have a conversation with them, or if they're taking students that next year or in the next round of studentship funding and things. So it's starting that conversation, and it doesn't have to be a lengthy email, and you don't have to go to them with the full proposal. It's just thinking about getting that initial contact. And then together, if they're willing to, if they are excited about some of your proposals, your ideas, then you would start developing your proposal and filling in the application forms. So it's kind of a back and forth at that point, then, to kind of ensure that the proposal is clear, that it fits, things that funding, money is present, kind of to support the research and support yourself within it.
So it sounds like it's almost like a kind of two-tiered process. And in the first instance, once you've kind of found someone that maybe you want to work with, or that sort of research area, the first step is to kind of then, maybe by sending your CV, as you suggested, sort of convince them that they should work with you. But obviously, at the same time, you probably want to just kind of pay attention to whether they're the kind of individual that you might want to work with for 3 years. And then obviously, assuming that you then, as a collaborative, go forward, you'll sort of fill out the paperwork and the proposal, which then goes towards, I mean, at your level, for example, then the kind of department would evaluate it. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And then what happens after that point? Let's say the department, then likes your proposal, what sort of is typically the kind of options at that point?
So at that point, then, if the department is going to take on board, you would get shortlisted for interview. I guess the key thing for us in our department is that we tend to take students who are fully funded. So all of our students are applying for funded studentships or scholarships, or coming to us with a scholarship. It is rare that we take self-funded students. And part of the reason behind this is simply it becomes really difficult for a student to work part-time or support themselves. And there's many other challenges that then kind of exist if they don't have funding support in place. We want to ensure that our students are fully supported within our department. We want to ensure that they have the capability that they don't have to take on additional work if they're not prepared to, or if they're not ahead in their PhDs and things like that. So it is important that you are applying for studentship, which means it is a competitive process. It's not just about the department liking your project or your supervisor being super enthusiastic. It is then about just showcasing your own skills and what you can bring to the program through interview. And we have multiple different kind of types of studentships that we've been offering. So we've got the Sarah Parker Raymond studentship, and these are all shown on our website. So we have multiple opportunities that come up each year.
And of course, your supervisor would be aware of these different sort of funding routes. So it's not necessarily the student themselves has to be acutely aware of these different ways of getting funding, but your supervisor will be best placed to advise you on how to do that, as well as the department as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess now we've dealt with the idea of, I mean, first of all, you should definitely do a PhD if you're motivated and passionate about research in a particular research area. That essentially the kind of process of applying for a PhD is identifying a supervisor in a research area you want to do, then working with them to a proposal, and then hopefully that proposal being accepted. Let's move forward to and assume that you've been successful in your application and you're starting your PhD, whether at Royal Holloway or a different institution. Maybe it would be useful to give some insight into what actually doing a PhD is like. Now, Beatrice, you obviously are the most recent of the four of us to have gone through the process. So perhaps maybe you can kind of give a whistle-stop tour. Maybe just, you know, what is the kind of average week like as a PhD student? What will you be doing during that time?
I'd say the first thing that's important to note with doing a PhD is that it's so varied. And so I would definitely say that getting yourself into a routine or managing your time in a way that works with you and also works with your supervisor is really important. So I'm the sort of person, I like to work kind of 9 to 5. I like to have like a working day, and then I can have my evenings and weekends and whatnot. So, and again, that very much suits Dawn as well, who is my supervisor. So often in a week, if I was collecting data, because I did developmental psychology, I would be in and out of schools. I'd be going to schools and I would be working with teachers, parents, children, collecting data, whether that was quantitatively, so getting children to complete online surveys, or qualitatively. So I also did interviews because I did a mixed methods thesis, which is where you do a bit of quantitative and a bit of qualitative. So often if I was collecting data, my weeks would be really busy with going to schools doing that. If I wasn't collecting data, my week could look like I might be analysing data, I'd be having meetings with Dawn, we'd be sat together with a coffee trying to work out what to do with some of my data. So we would be doing that. Or again, you might be working on more of the sort of literary parts of your thesis. So reading, taking notes, writing studies, writing your literature review. So there's so many different components that go into a PhD. That's why I said at the beginning, it's important to get a routine that kind of works for you. Finding a space that you can have as your like office or workspace, and just making sure that you find a routine that really works for you and really benefits the way that you approach your PhD. And again, making sure that that kind of links with your supervisor as well, because obviously you do develop a very close relationship with your supervisor. So it's important to make sure that you both kind of know how each other works. So yeah, like I said, it can be really varied depending on what you're doing. But something that I really enjoyed about my PhD was, because it's so varied and because it's your project, you have a lot of autonomy. And I really liked that. So, you know, you can sit down at your desk at 9 a.m. and go, so what shall I do today? Like, what shall I start off with? And I really liked that. So yeah, that's kind of what I would say about that.
And I assume, I mean, obviously a lot of a PhD is independent led. So obviously it sounds like you spend a lot of your time reading, obviously going into schools and collecting data as well. So a lot of the time was, you know, independent away from your supervisor. But obviously there is support there for you throughout the 3 or so years you do it. So one thing is obviously the supervisor, him or herself, but other aspects as well. There is other sorts of training and support that students might have. I don't know, maybe Dawn or Jenny, maybe you can just sort of give some perspectives, maybe from a supervisory point of view, as to what a supervisor sort of does for their student, as well as the kind of sources of support, so training that might be available to PhD students.
So I'll let Dawn cover training, but like Beatrice was saying, I feel like there is a lot of support available from your supervisor, and you probably will feel that you need more support at the beginning. You know, PhDs have this sort of trajectory where you pretty much know you're going to start with some reading and you're going to end with some writing, and in the middle, who knows what happens. It could go in any number of different directions depending on whether you're analysing large pre-existing data sets, running a trial, whether you're working with children, whether you need to collect data online or in person, doing an MRI or an EEG project. It's all going to be completely different. And therefore, the training and the skills you need are going to be completely different depending on your PhD topic area. But in my experience, I felt like, at least at the very beginning of my PhD, I had more meetings with my supervisor. I needed more support. I had more questions, and sort of gradually there's a shift around the sort of second year, perhaps, where you are very, very much deep in this kind of data collection phase. And then at the end, you get this sort of support, which maybe changes more towards a lot of feedback on a lot of different drafts of chapters and papers and that sort of thing, as well as you feeling more confident in the fact that you are perhaps even more of an expert by the end, hopefully, than your supervisor in your particular niche of an area. So there is a sort of gradual shift in the supervisor-supervisee relationship, where I think the PhD student becomes the sort of the boss of the supervisor, perhaps by the end, and more of an expert themselves. And that's really how the way things I think ideally would shift around. But I mean, training is available in a variety of different senses, and Dawn will probably be the best person to outline this, but sort of the training that people will need will depend on exactly what they're doing for their PhD, which is as long as a piece of string, as we were saying before.
I think what Jenny said was really important. At the end of any PhD, you tend to know, the student tends to know more than the supervisor on that particular topic area. So I start out by saying that essentially what you need is a supervisor-student fit. The supervisor needs to be able to supervise that project, but it does not need to be directly in the supervisor's field of expertise. There needs to be something that you're building on within it, whether that's the methods they use or the topic area in general. But your question, you will become the expert in that question. And the supervisor's role tends to shift so that they start asking questions and you've got to justify, but it's also prep for the PhD viva at the end as well. So you're justifying why you think something needs to be present or not present within the theses. And I think that's really important, that it is not the supervisor learning a new area of expertise. This is helping them develop the student's expertise. And yeah, the supervisor can offer a lot of training and support. There's also training and support within departments. So there will be department training programs. There's training through our doctoral partnership programs. So there's training through SENS, there's training through the BBSRC Lido program. There's training at the college level. So the doctoral school has their researcher development program. So there's multiple avenues for training, as well as some funds that are reserved for external training opportunities if they arise. So if there's a course or something that you need to take that we don't have on offer, some students will take something from another institution, and that's available as well. Students are required to do training as part of their PhD. It is a training process. So depending, it might be 5 to 10 days, and it will be outlined in your offer letter in terms of those training expectations. And I think that that's really important. But many of our students go well beyond that. Training comes through going to research seminars, listening to other speakers, understanding about how they communicate about their research and their work, but also gaining new ideas for, oh, that's a really interesting methodology that they've used. I can kind of take away some of that. Some students you can get a list of 20 different training courses and think I need to take it all, but you don't need to do it all. And you definitely don't need to do it all in your first year. It's one of these things that can be spread out, and thinking about where do you really need to place your focus right now and where do you place your focus later on. And I think that's where the supervisor and their experience comes into play to help support the student.
I think those are some great, obviously, sort of sources of support and training that students can get whilst they're doing their PhD. I'll just throw one additional into the mix that occurred to my head when you were saying these kind of places where you can learn additional things. But one thing that I actually ended up learning quite a bit from was YouTube as well. So I learned mediation and moderation. There's lots and lots of individuals, on YouTube that are sort of teaching those sort of statistical techniques, so that you can get those kind of sort of support through YouTube. YouTube aren't paying me to say that, by the way, unfortunately, but if they're listening, I will take £10 for saying so. Dawn, you did mention the Viva at the end of the whole 3 or so years. So I guess it's probably worth just sort of finishing up on that point. I don't know, Beatrice, if you want to explain what your Viva was like. I think a lot of people get very anxious and scared about the Viva, probably understandably so, because it's the accumulation of 3 years. And they think it's going to be this kind of huge sort of test that's really kind of anxiety provoking and stressful. Did you, in the end, find that to be the case, or was it different for you?
Honestly, when I when I first started my PhD, the thought of the Viva struck fear into my soul. I was like, how am I ever going to be able to do a Viva? I literally was so terrified. I used to, like, every time I thought about it, I'd be like, don't think about it. We're going to push that box to the back of the wardrobe. We're not going to think about that. I was always so scared of it. And again, and we haven't really mentioned this too much, but in terms of like the kind of social side of the PhD, again, I think this is a really good example of, if possible and where possible, building that kind of social network of other people that do PhDs so that you can talk about these things. Because where I had friends who were also doing PhDs, who were in the years above me, who did their Vivas sooner than I did, that was really beneficial to hear their experience and just kind of see that people do survive it. That there is, people do, even if you have a stressful Viva, or if you have, a positive Viva, every Viva is different, just like every PhD is different. Although you don't think you are confident and you're nervous and you're worried, there's actually so much information in your head that actually when it comes to the Viva, you're more prepared than you think you are. And I know that, for example, before my Viva, I did a practice Viva with my supervisors, and I found that really beneficial because it kind of gave me the opportunity to practice a few responses. Like, it's pretty 99% likely that in your Viva they'll start off by being like, so could you just give us an overview of your thesis, or can you just summarize your research question and what you found? So you can rehearse there are certain bits of information you can kind of rehearse and kind of, and that often helps with the nerves, because you're like, okay, well, I know I've got this question and this question down, and I'm sure they're going to ask those. But I think another thing that I've mentioned to a lot of my friends who are preparing for their Viva is that a Viva isn't a trick. It's not, no one's trying to trip you up. No one's trying to, ruin the past 3 or 4 years of your life or destroy your thesis. They're not going to rip apart your thesis in front of you. It's just a case of them asking you questions to really know more about your thesis and understand more about your experience, because obviously they've read your thesis but they've not walked alongside you throughout your PhD experience. Like Dawn mentioned, you're doing it for years, so you're really passionate about it, and it gives you this like space where you can talk about it for hours with people who are just as interested and want to know more about it than you. And if you think about it, at any point in your life, where are you going to be in a room with someone who is equally as interested about your thesis, and you can just talk about it for like 2 hours, 3 hours? You know, that doesn't happen. So it was actually a really nice opportunity. So yeah, it is nerve-wracking, it is anxiety inducing, but actually you're more prepared for it than you think you are, and it's actually a really positive experience, and it can be a really enjoyable experience. Like I said, I can't speak for everyone who's ever done a Viva, because Vivas are different, but that was at least my experience.
I would agree with a lot of what you said about that, to be honest. I think just to add something, which is that you're the expert in the room in your Viva.
Yes,
you know more than your examiners do about your particular thesis. Perhaps they know broadly about the area. Yes, they are the experts in the room, but you are the expert on the book that you have written. And therefore, the purpose of the Viva really is to ask you questions about it. Can you defend why you made these decisions? Did you do this? But really, that's the purpose of the Viva. It isn't, as you say, to sort of trip you up. But certainly different people have different lengths of a Viva. Some go on for a really long time. Mine was over in about an hour and a half, and I was like, is that it? Did I do something wrong? and sort of went out of the room, and then was like, oh my goodness, where do I go now? Do I have to get my supervisor? I don't know. It sort of can feel like a bit of a weird surreal experience, especially beforehand, when you're feeling very pent up and anxious, and then you're finally in the room, and it can feel a bit like this decompression moment as well. So I think it's worth just sort of thinking about that the whole 3 years has been this preparation for the Viva, as you were saying before. And if I was to give any Viva top tip, it would be, you are not expected to answer immediately. They ask you a question and you're not sure about the answer, take a moment, take a beat. Say, oh, good question, I'm going to have a think about it. Make notes. Like if they've asked you something statistical and you want to sort of draw some graphs to it, you know, whatever helps, because that's it, at least what I did in my Viva. And I feel like thinking about that and taking the pressure off myself to sort of feel that I have to answer as if I was giving a presentation or something like that, rather than it being more of a discussion. And actually sometimes you do need to take a moment to think about it. Like I would definitely say that is what's worth doing in my one Viva top tip.
I think we could probably end up talking about Vivas forever. Sorry, Dawn.
I was just going to say, I think Jenny's point as well. I always tell all of our students, you are the expert in the room. You know better than anybody there exactly what you did and why you made the decisions that you made. And that's kind of really crucial for the Viva. And Beatrice mentioned about the mock Viva. I have to say, my supervisor, we did a mock Viva. I was not nervous for my Viva until I did that mock Viva. And then none of those questions came up. Keep in mind that your supervisor knows your thesis fairly well, and they will have different questions. And that does not mean that those are the questions that will necessarily come up in your Viva, but it is important to start talking about it and thinking about it.
Yeah, and I
think it's helpful.
Keeping good notes about why you made decisions, as well as a good referencing software, so you can organize sort of your reading throughout the PhD. This isn't really related to the Viva, but I had sort of notebooks of why we'd made different decisions, especially from, you know, when you get to the very end in 3 years' time, it can be very easy to forget why you decided something 2 years ago. And having a sort of record of these things can be useful because you then have this justification that you can put in your thesis, and then it's available to be discussed, rather than thinking, oh no, I can't remember why we did that when it comes to it.
And very finally, just to round off the discussion, obviously we all stayed in academia after doing our PhD, but I assume there are other things that people can do with a PhD. Dawn, we're a bit pushed for time, but maybe you can just give a brief snapshot to other things that maybe some of our former PhD students have done, or other things that people might be able to do with a PhD?
I think it's really important to think about that actually the PhD does not mean that you have to go into academia, and about 50% of our students now do leave academia and they're working as data analysts. Some have gone off and started their own company and done very well. Others are working for charities, industry. Some have used it as a stepping stone to get into a DCLIN program. So there are multiple kind of different avenues. Having a psychology PhD prepares you for delivering on large projects, working with individuals and working with teams. And all of these skills are crucial to a number of different industry kind of linked work.
Great, thanks. So I thank you all for taking part. It's been really useful to get your insights on what doing a PhD is like, as well as the application process. We do have a little bit of time left for a quiz, if you don't mind just indulging me on trying to test your psychological knowledge. So today's quiz that I put together is actually based on a paper which was by Hagbloom and colleagues. I hope I pronounced that man or that woman's name correctly. That was published in 2002 in the Review of General Psychology. Now, what they did in that paper was they tried to figure out who are the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. Now, they did this in various different ways, but the one metric that we'll look at, because it's perhaps most relevant for maybe people that are listening, is the number of times these people were cited in an introductory psychology textbook. Okay, so I have the top 20 psychologists named here, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes maximum, and then your time is up. It's a team game, so you can work together. See how many of those 20 you can get. And obviously, if you're listening at home, you can maybe pause now and have a go for 5 minutes and see if you can beat my team of PhD experts, evidently.
Oh,
and if you beat them, then you can get their PhD, obviously. Okay, so I don't know if anyone wants to take a guess.
Freud.
Yep, Sigmund Freud was number 1.
Of course he was. Of course.
Piaget.
Milgram.
Stanley Milgram is also in the list. Yes, let me just bring up the number. Stanley Milgram was number 12.
Dawn said Piaget.
Oh, Piaget was number 4. Sorry, I'm just crossing these off as you get them so I can keep count.
Young.
Carl Jung is not in the list. Wasn't as good as
Really?
Freud, apparently.
Ainsworth, Mary Ainsworth.
Yeah.
No, not here.
No.
It's a surprising omission. Yeah.
Aronson.
Did you say Erickson?
Erickson too, but
Oh, well, okay. Erickson is correct. Aronson isn't here, no. But
Who's the one that
Erickson
did
is
the,
the psychosocial stage of development.
Zimbardo.
Oh yeah, Zimbardo.
Zimbardo is absent on the list. Must be further
Really?
down. Not in the top 20.
Ooh.
Wow. Who was the one
Bandura.
with the,
Bandura, that's number 3.
there was that study where it was
Number
like
2.
crash bang. It was about the cars. It was the eyewitness testimony. What's
Oh,
her name?
Elizabeth Loftus.
That's it. Loftus.
Yeah, so she's number 20th on the list. So you're getting there.
How many have we got left? 15.
You may have said others. You've got 6 so far. You've got about another
Oh
3
my God.
minutes.
Oh,
The imitation one, maybe. What's that called? The babies sticking their tongues out.
melts off.
Yes.
I don't see it on my list.
Oh.
What about Maslow?
Yes,
yeah,
so
hierarchy of
Abraham
needs.
Maslow is on the list. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs was number 14.
That's a
Abraham
classic.
Maslow.
oh my God, I literally, my mind has gone blank.
I mean, we should point out that obviously you don't all teach every area of psychology, and so some of these are very geared towards social psychology, perhaps because it was a very influential area in the 1960s and so forth.
The lines, Ash, is it?
Oh yeah.
No, Solomon Asch isn't in this list either. So there is some
What?
really surprising additions. I think I would have not got some of these. Some of these are quite obscure, and I wasn't fully aware of exactly what they did. There are some real big ones missing, however, that you haven't yet got.
Oh my God, really? Can you give us a clue?
there are some really famous studies conducted that you haven't yet named the psychologist who did them.
Ainsworth?
Mary Ainsworth, no.
Oh.
There is.
Can you guys on the study?
Well, I just thought I don't want to give it away, but let's just say
Come on,
behaviorism.
Sam.
I'll say the word behaviorism and go from there.
Oh, Skinner.
Pavlov.
Oh, yeah.
So Skinner was number 2. I think his partner is on this list as well.
Pavlov.
No, not Pavlov. Skinner, I think Skinner did the study with somebody else as well, which is famous on this list. Maybe I'm misremembering.
Bowlby.
Bowlby, again, is surprisingly missing from this list.
What? Who are these people?
Some of them, I have to admit, I would say, even knowing the names, there were some that I had to quickly Google and remind myself who they were. So it's not the easiest. You'd be surprised at some of them.
Yeah. Haslam? Have I made that up?
Haslam, I think he's perhaps maybe, because it's obviously 20th century, Haslam is probably very more influential in the 21st.
Oh, right, fair.
I think a lot of these were 50s, 60s, 70s, really classic psychology.
There's another one. Surely around like Piaget made me think there must be one that
Vygotsky.
Vygotsky is not on this list as well. Again, surprising omissions going on here.
I think we need to rewrite this list.
Yeah.
Yeah, evidently so. So your time is up. So you managed to get 8. Some of them I think that you'll probably kick yourselves, but I think 8 is not bad. I think perhaps knowing the list, I probably would have known maybe about 14, 15 of these psychologists quite easily. The other 5 seems quite obscure to me. So ones you didn't get, and maybe you did say them I didn't hear. Carl Rogers, did anyone say Carl Rogers?
Oh, yeah, what about him?
So Stanley Schachter is number 6. Does anyone know who Stanley Schachter is? I had to look this one up. So he is apparently responsible for the 2-factor theory of emotion. He argued that emotions have a physiological arousal and a cognitive label. So there we are, you knew that one. Harry Harlow. So it must be Harlow's Monkeys that we...
yeah.
Cloth and wire.
Then number 8 is Roger Brown. I don't know if anyone is familiar with who Roger Brown is. Again,
sounds like anyone.
Sorry?
You can go down the pub. Well, I could bump into a Roger Brown anywhere.
Yeah, it does sound very generic, but it's apparently he did a lot of work on sort of language acquisition in children. He was also famous for flashbulb memories as well. I had to look that one up. Neil Miller is another one which I wasn't quite familiar with who this person is, but maybe you know.
I think I do, but I don't know why. He rings a bell.
He's attributed for being a founding father for biofeedback.
Yeah,
this one is McClelland, whose work is about motivation and need theories. You missed out Martin Seligman on learned helplessness, Gordon Bauer on human memory, Lawrence Kohlberg on moral stages of development. John Watson was the one that I was trying to hint at with what.
Oh, yeah.
And then the other 2 are social psychologists, and obviously therefore might be slightly easier for me to know. Gordon Allport, particularly very famous in personality and social psychology, and Leon Festinger for cognitive dissonance theory. Those were the other ones that you didn't get. But still, I think a very good number to have gotten under timed conditions and on the spur of the moment. So well done. Obviously, if you've got more at home, then you are more than welcome to do a PhD, because evidently you've met the threshold. Anyway, thank you guys.
We need to go study an intro to psychology textbook now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, anyway, thank you very much, guys, for taking part. Appreciate to have you on the show, and perhaps I'll have you on again at some point in the near future. Thanks.
Amazing.
Thanks, Sam.
Bye.
Thank you for watching the Psychology Debrief. If you have any suggestions for new topics, quizzes, or any other content psychology related, feel free to get in touch via email or Twitter. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Bye!